Good morning. Let's talk about Slewfoot. So, I read this last week and I thought that I would love it. By all accounts, I should have loved this book, okay? It is set in the colonial times, it's witchy, it's a woman getting her revenge, it is a woman using everything within her means to keep control of her land in a patriarchal society. I should have loved this book. I did not love this book. And I want to talk about why, because I think it's something I've seen people say they don't like it. It didn't work for them, but I haven't seen a lot of reasons for it, because I've usually seen it in a vlog where people are like, I didn't like this, or everyone loves it. They gush, I'm here for women's wrongs. Good for her. I see those types of things. But I had some major problems with it, and I think I was talking to a couple people, and I think some of it is that Brom is a wonderful artist. His art is absolutely stunning, but he is not a writer. And this, I think, also could have been a good short story, maybe to go along with the illustrations, like a couple of paragraphs with each illustration talking about how the story went or the character in the illustration could have been lovely. Or working with another writer, because the other thing is that it's very clear in this book that it was written by a man who was writing about a woman dealing with a problem that we have historical facts for. And I say this as someone who spent 1/3 of one of my college English classes being taught about the witch trials from a man who was fascinated by them and the groupthink and all of the stuff that happened within them. So a lot of the points that he made, I have heard. So let's give you a spoiler-free, let's talk spoiler-free first. The plot is essentially Abatha is married to Edward. Abatha is a immigrant from London, and essentially her father sold her to a man in the colonies. Sorry about the dog. We're in Vermont, I believe. We're in Connecticut. We're in Connecticut, and Abatha, at the age of, I believe she was 19, was sold. Her father took a payment from Edward for Abatha to make the journey across to the States and become his wife. And so she talked about how she lucked out with Edward because he's actually a nice man, and though he's not conventionally attractive, he's a nice man. I don't know why the conventionally attractive thing needed to be thrown in there personally, but it's there. So she spends a few years married to Edward, living on his farm. We are in the Puritan-run colonies. We are in 1666. So the rules around societal interactions are very strict, regardless of if you're a man or a woman, and it's incredibly intense. People can't do anything right Christianity. Very wild times. And so Abatha is from England, so she's been a little bit more liberated in her rights, not as much as we would call today, but she still had a little bit more freedom being from England and not from the colonies run by the puritanical churches. So Edward, his land is technically, he's buying it in payments from his older brother Wallace. Wallace inherited both of his father's properties. One is a working farm, and the other one is this property that Edward received from Wallace if he gave Edward 50% of his crop of corn. I can't remember how many bushels it is, but it is literally over 50% of his crop of corn. And we are in the time when people are farming for subsistence for the most part. So that leaves little for Abatha and Edward to have for their own meals. And on top of that, Wallace comes over and eats whenever he wants all of their food, drinks all of their drinks, that type of thing. He's just a bully. He is a cartoonish bully. And this is where one of my first problems is he's just a caricature of a bully. I was picturing the cartoon version, the 1990s cartoon version of Washington Irving's Sleepy Hollow, of Brom in the that cartoon is what I was picturing with Wallace, is like an old Disney, like maybe it wasn't 90s, but I watched it in the 90s. It might have been even older than that, but an old Disney, classic Disney drawing of a villain is pretty much what Wallace was to his younger brother. So we have Wallace coming in and just like eating all their food, being a slob type of thing, and I was like, okay, clearly this is a villain. So Wallace tells Edward, so I invested in tobacco this year, which does not grow well in New England, and it all went south, so I'm taking your farm and giving it away for payment for the loan that I can't pay back. And Abatha is furious at this and starts interjecting, which is horrible for the time. She can't do that, so then it starts a big fight between them, and Wallace basically threatens to tell the ministers about Abatha's behavior, which could get her put in the stocks. So Edward defends her, and now we have this, he's like, okay, Wallace, I'll do whatever you want, type of thing. So Wallace leaves all happy, and then Edward is like, him and Abatha spend the entire night having a conversation about how he should stand up to Wallace and what he should say to the ministers, because apparently this land that they received, Edward put all the work in to make it arable by like moving in dirt and all this stuff, and because it just was not good farming land, he had to cut down a ton of trees. It was a cabin essentially. So that's the first chapter pretty much. That's pretty much the beginning of the book, is we get this kind of setup for why Abatha needs to keep this farm, because so then he goes, the next morning we go to church. We have a 3-hour-long church thing, which we get told about. We get told about how they have to sit. Abatha has to sit in the very back. She's the most disrespected person in town. We get some interactions with how everyone dislikes her. And so we're kind of setting this up where she's already an outcast. And then we have this scene where Edward finally stands up to Wallace, to the ministers. One of the ministers agrees with Edward, and he's like, yeah, no, Wallace can't give up your land. You have one payment left to make. If you can make that payment, blah, 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 you can keep your land. Wallace, you better figure something else out. You can't promise land to two people. So Wallace then decides that that's Abatha's fault, and he is going to get her. So that's kind of, we've already got this set up now. And then in the meantime, we're getting told about this being in the woods who is being brought back to life by things that are giving him offerings, and he's being brought back to life. And so we're jumping POVs, which is fine between these two things. But then we start finding out what everyone in the town thinks about Abatha. We get told things from their perspective inside their head. And this bothered me because we were knowing every single person's thoughts as they were having it, which made the scenes incredibly confusing. So I was already kind of confused about what was going on when we were dealing with the being in the woods that was being called Father in the first couple chapters, because we would have his thoughts and then another creature's thoughts, and I was like, well, whose thoughts are we hearing? Like, I was so confused because we're just hearing everybody's thoughts. So the being in the woods is growing stronger, and then Edward ends up dying in the woods, and Wallace happens to come along and be like, all right, as soon as the funeral's over, give me your land. And so Abatha stands up and she's like, oh, but as a widow, like, don't I have these rights? And the ministers are like, yeah, you do. So if you can make that last payment, you can keep the land. But if you can't make that last payment, you will go live with Wallace and be his maid until your payment is paid off. And it will take you 15 years or something crazy like that to pay off that one last payment of corn, as working as his maid. So obviously she doesn't want to do that. So essentially what we're doing so far is we're just kind of like shoving all of the worst things at Abatha constantly. We're just torturing her for the sake of torturing her. Everything that can go wrong in her life is going wrong in her life. And then we have a meet cute between Abatha and the thing in the woods, where they make a pact, essentially, they start kind of like working together, and she gets this amazing crop of corn, and he's gonna like help her get her land back together, or keep her land. But Wallace has other plans, and he keeps sabotaging her secretly so that he can take her land. And then eventually the town gets riled up, and we have a witch trial thing. That's essentially like the spoiler-ish free, like, because nobody, it's really like, we know it's a witch trial thing. So there's your witch trial thing. So my issues with this was the main thing was that Abatha did not have any agency at all, in this, because there's a point in a story where you go from the plot doing things and the character reacting to then the character making decisions that start to shape the plot. That's how it's usually goes in books. That never happened. The plot just kept plotting, except for the fact that Wallace started shaping the plot, not Abatha. Things that Wallace started doing and his decisions started shaping the plot and making what was going to happen because we just kept sabotaging Abatha and pushing her further and further and further to make her this caricature of an independent woman. And meanwhile, every time Abatha did something good or bad or neutral, we were hearing all of the thoughts of the men around her. Every single one. We only had like one other woman in the story who actually was like a three-dimensional character, who kind of made decisions based on like emotion and not just based on character of plot, and she didn't feel like an NPC essentially. And it's like, and there was still no justification. I'm like, there was no justification of why she did those things. She just did them so that Abatha would have like one semi-ally essentially, and also so that we could like have somebody else to punish in the end. And it happened to be like the minister's wife. And it was like, it was just, this plot was so messy. It needed more rewrites, like, because it just was not really there. I don't know what the point of the story was really, based on everything that's happening. But like, I was getting so frustrated because Wallace just kept getting more and more cartoon villainy with the things he was doing, and I could not handle it. The story was about Wallace and the being in the woods. We got his thoughts all the time. We spent time with him but we didn't even develop him. He still didn't really like become an actual three-dimensional character. Wallace is the only one who was a three-dimensional character in this story. But even how cartoonish he was still the main focus of the story. And that's not the story I wanted to read. So now I'm going to get into a little bit of spoilers because there's some things I want to talk about that I think are spoily, but they irked me in a way that I think is really important to talk about. So this was a 2-star book for me, and I'm going to tell you why in this spoiler section. So if you haven't read this book or you're planning on it and don't want to be spoiled, thanks for hanging out. I will have something soon. If you want to be spoiled, here we go. So partway through the book, so Father is the being in the woods, and Abatha decides she's going to call him Samson after the goat that was sacrificed to him. It was her goat, and he was sacrificed to Samson, so he has like some goat-like features. Then he eats Edward and gets some man-like figures. So she's like, I'm not going to call you Father because that's weird. And honestly, yes, that is weird. So she starts calling him Samson after the goat. Fair. But if you know anything about any sort of like pagan stuff, you know that this is supposed to be the horned god. Like that's who this is. This is the god of the hunt. This is the horned god. Because we're constantly talking about father and mother being like the earth and mother nature, which was a little bit interesting because I was like, if we're going to do the horned god, why are we not doing the mother, maiden, and crone sequence? Which I thought maybe we would do that with Abatha and follow her through those stories, but we didn't. So it was kind of weird to have the horned god and not the mother, maiden, and crone anywhere really in the story. So where was I going with this? So he's the horned god, and he has these little like forest creatures, which are really cool and really well drawn and really interesting. But also, again, they're just, one of them is like a little mischievous kind of villainous, really just wants Father to go and murder everything. And the other two are just kind of there for the most part. And so Forrest is this like a little possum one, and he just wants Father to go murder. He's like, that's really all he wants. And then we have Sky, which is like a magpie, raven-y thing. And then we have Creek, which is a fish. Creek is creepy. I'll see if I can find a picture because Creek is actually the creepiest one. I really like Sky and Forest the way they're drawn, but Creek is terrifying. So anyway, so Abatha and father start doing this like magic together, because it turns out Abatha's mother was a cunning woman, which was a witch. And so Abatha has like some innate powers, I guess, like in her blood. And so they're able to like grow her farm. They get the bees that Edward kept to be like producing massive amounts of honey and kind of like do her bidding. And she just kind of keeps getting more and more down this hole. There's a lot of conversations about religion and God that I think are really what he wanted to do with it, was criticize religion, which is why I say this would have worked really well had they just done it as some essays to go with the drawings that he did. So that's kind of their relationship. Father is getting braver and more like intense, and then he kind of just like fucks off for a little bit and gets like put to sleep by they keep calling him the shaman. And this is where I again have some issues. So if I can find these pictures, I will put them up. So this guy is essentially like anti the horned god, like against him, but I can't figure out quite why. There was some references to the indigenous folk in the area about how it was like something to do with their religion, which then we brought them in, and this scene was completely unnecessary. We could have done it in a very different way, but we brought them in just for them, three of them to be bought off by Wallace. Wallace paid them to go try to steal her corn, and then when they couldn't get the load carried away because Wallace got too greedy and filled the load too high and the wagon broke, so he decided to burn it and burn down the thing and then framed them for it. So Abatha killed two of them. So it was really just for like to kill them. We could have done that with any dude. Like we could have also just had Wallace sneak in and burn it. Like it would have done the same thing, except for it wouldn't have. We didn't need to bring them in. So that bothered me. Hey, Itchy. Thank you. So, yeah. And then the other part that really bothered me was the end of the book. So we have this guy through the whole book who's like always looking for signs of witches and devilry and stuff. And even though the town like hates him and stuff and really thinks he's kind of off his rocker, we have Wallace bring him in to help, because Wallace is like, this is my last and final act. We're going to paint Abatha as a witch. And so he brings in his son and this man, and they like find proof. And so they kill her cat, because her cat is one that she saved from being mauled by dogs. So he's like got a crooked like back and stuff. He's kind of beat up. And they bring her cat as evidence of her being able to raise the dead, and then kill her cat. And then they accuse Abatha, and they're like, one of the ministers is like, don't worry, you'll get a just trial. And she's like, there's no justice from men. So we get to the trial, and we get in the head of every man there. Abatha gets accused, she gets sentenced, and they decide to hang her from her feet, where we suddenly bring in these two men from out of town, and we get their entire thoughts on the whole situation. And they're just guards, they don't matter. And we're getting all of their thoughts on the situation. We're getting their conversations about them just wanting to go home, like, can we kill her faster type of thing, which that was fine, but we don't need to hear their inner thoughts while they're having this conversation, because we could have stuck in Abatha's POV because she was watching it. Or like if we wanted to switch POVs, we could have switched to the minister's wife, who we also decided was a witch, and put in a cage next to Abatha, because she was accused by her own daughter. So we had the little girls in the town jump in and start blaming everyone, which is what happened in the witch trials. But there was no setup for why that was happening. Like, there was literally no reason. And it was just so that we could, like, do mean things, basically. So we have Abatha hanging upside down. She finally, like, calls out to Samson hard enough that he, like, he magically wakes up from this slumber and comes to save her. So again, we don't get her saving herself. We get her being saved. And so he comes and he starts killing people. He lets her down, and then she starts killing people. And she is like, I want one kill. I want that old man. So she gets Wallace first. And that should have been her scene, right? That should have been it. And we get the scene, and it was okay. but we're in Wallace's head the whole time, knowing what he thinks about what's happening, not about what Abatha's thinking. She's supposed to be the character, and instead we're in Wallace's head, getting Wallace's thoughts about the whole thing and his final thoughts. And we don't really get a whole lot from Abatha in that scene. And I was just like, this should have been her scene. Why is she after this one man who accused her and not like feeling justified in this man who has her entire life in the colonies, had his thumb on her? Why are we not more like about him? Why are we about this other guy? So here's the thing though. She goes to go get the other guy. Dude shoots her. He shoots her. So we get father dragging him and her to some like altar thing, basically. Altar in front of the tree. And we get Abatha resurrected and father kills that guy. So she doesn't even get to kill that guy. She just gets resurrected. And I was like, where is this her story? She like killed Wallace. She killed a couple people in the town. But really it was father. So we get more from the men in the story than we get from her. And that was like, I was like, what is the point of this story other than like to be like, this is what men thought of the witch trials? There could have been so many other things done with this instead of it being what it was. Because then at the end we get this whole thing about how she like lives in the woods now and the Appalachian Trail, the northern part of the Appalachian Trail, and like kills some dude bro hikers. Some very dude bro hikers and hunters. Like, I honestly think it really was more of like here's how women suffer and here's how demons can help them, instead of like, if she had made a better pact, like made a pact and become more powerful within herself, like, because they took away her ability to use her magic because she has this braid of like her family's hair, and they took it away and burned it. And so she's like, without that, I have no power. And it could have been her like being like, oh, the power is within me type of thing, right? We still only got like, her only power was for her to call for help. And I didn't like it. I don't think it did what it was trying to do. I don't see what people see in it. And I don't think it was well written either. The writing style was just not good. So this month, up until I finished Botanical Daughter, I read two 2-star books to start out the month. So my month is not starting out well. It's just not. So anyway, this is what I thought of Slewfoot. I really think Slewfoot could have been better. If you know, here's the thing. Okay, actually, here's the thing I was going to say. One more thing. Another historical witchy book that I read is The Highland Witch by, I can't remember, but I'll put it up here. I read this last year, and this is based on a myth, a legend of there's some truth in it, in the legend. Okay, hold on. This is based on one of the massacres in the Scottish Highlands, and it follows a witch who escapes up to the Highlands, kind of lives on her own. She does some like minor healing and stuff, and she tried to warn the MacDonald clan before they were massacred. I can't remember much about the actual history of it, but this is a book where a woman who is persecuted nearly her entire life escapes to the Highlands, spends her whole life on her own and isolated, and is powerful in her own right because of that. She becomes kind of accepted by the clan and kind of does like her thing, and she just lives her life. And it is so much more powerful than this story for like a woman's rights, like, and her ability to be. She manages to like warn a lot of these people and get them out. She is like, she has agency in her story, even though in the end she's on trial as a witch in the end, and she's still has agency in that story even while she's in prison and being interrogated. She has agency that Abatha was never given in the story. It was so obviously from a man's point of view, where there was just no choices that she made that were logical. She was like hesitant to do anything until like near the end of the story. And then even then her choices did not make sense. And it was frustrating. And it's not at all what I expected it to be based on the praise that it's getting. Again, stunning art. And I did see quite a few reviews that were like 3 stars just for the art. No, I gave it 2. Because I'm not judging it for the art, because it's not a comic. If it was a comic, I could maybe give it 3 if we'd been using that art throughout and done. But we didn't even... Anyway, there were like headers to each chapter that were like black and white rendered fine art paintings. But the paintings of the characters weren't even inserted in the book in a point where it would make sense. I have some to make it like an illustrated edition. Like I have some illustrated editions of like the Dark Tower series that are done by like in like a fine art style, and they're inserted in a point where they make sense, where you can actually like look at them. Like had we had like the pictures of like Creek in a point where we had just been introduced to them, I could have 100% been on board with it a little bit more for the artwork side of it. But it was just, you bought a book, here's some art prints to go with it, like would have been better. Just sell me the art. Just sell me the art. Anyway, if you also didn't like this, please let me know, because I want to know why. If you did like this, please let me know, because I want to know why. Like, anyway, thanks for hanging out with me. I'll see you again.